In 2023, Bernard Arnault briefly became the richest person on Earth, not by building semiconductors, not by launching rockets, not by controlling a software monopoly. He got there by selling handbags. LVMH, the conglomerate behind Louis Vuitton, Dior, Givenchy, Bulgari, Tiffany, and 72 other brands, generated 86 billion euros in revenue last year. The flagship Louis Vuitton never full tote retails for $2,030. The raw leather, hardware, and thread inside it cost approximately $28 to source. That's a markup of over 7,000%. And customers are lined up, grateful for the privilege of paying it. This is not an accident. It is not luck. It is one of the most precisely engineered business models in the history of commerce. And once you understand how it works, you will never look at a price tag the same way again. The first thing to understand is that LVMH does not sell products. It sells inaccessibility. Here's what most people get completely wrong about luxury. They assume the high price reflects high quality. Sometimes it does. A well-constructed Louis Vuitton piece will outlast almost anything at a consumer price point. But the pricing logic has nothing to do with material cost or labor hours. Research by INSEAD professor Jean-Noël Kapferer, the world's foremost academic authority on luxury brand strategy, shows that luxury pricing is determined almost entirely by what he calls dream value. The product must sit just barely out of reach for the majority of the target market. Not impossible to attain, just difficult enough that owning it signals effort, taste, and status. This is why Louis Vuitton has never held a sale, not once. Not a seasonal clearance, not a Black Friday promotion, not a valued customer discount email, not in 170 years of operation. In 2017, LVMH purchased competitor Richemont's unsold watch inventory, valued at over 600 million euros, specifically to destroy it rather than allow it to reach the discount market. Discounting sends one irreversible signal: this product is not worth the price. And once that signal escapes, the dream value collapses. Permanently. The mechanics go much deeper than simply refusing to discount. In the late 1980s, Bernard Arnault began systematically acquiring French fashion houses in distress. Dior was in chaos following internal power struggles. Celine was drifting toward mid-market irrelevance. Givenchy had lost its identity after its founder departed. Arnault's insight, which most business analysts at the time considered borderline irrational, was that these brands possessed something no amount of capital could create from scratch: heritage. A 1947 Christian Dior sketch, a 1925 Louis Vuitton steamer trunk built for European royalty, a 1955 Givenchy gown worn by Audrey Hepburn on the cover of Vogue. These were artifacts of cultural history, and Arnault acquired them at distressed asset prices. Then came the counterintuitive move. Rather than modernizing these brands toward mass-market accessibility, the standard turnaround playbook, Arnault deliberately narrowed them. He cut product lines that diluted the image. He terminated designers who prioritized volume over cultural relevance. He refused licensing agreements that would have put Louis Vuitton logos on affordable merchandise. He hired generational design talent, John Galliano, Marc Jacobs, Hedy Slimane, Kim Jones, not to create clothes that moved units, but to generate cultural conversation. The Paris Fashion Week runway shows are not commercial events. They are media production events. They generate imagery and editorial coverage that circulates for months and primes the target market's desire before a single product reaches a boutique floor. Here is the most counterintuitive insight in this entire model, the one that separates LVMH from every failed luxury imitator that tried to copy the surface without understanding the mechanism. LVMH actively manages desire by engineering rejection. Walk into the flagship Louis Vuitton store on the Champs-Élysées and ask for the most in-demand pieces. You will frequently be told they are unavailable today. This is partly genuine production scarcity. LV deliberately caps annual output and partly choreographed friction. Either way, the outcome is identical. The customer leaves more committed to the purchase than when they entered. This is documented psychology, not intuition. Robert Cialdini's landmark 1984 research established what he calls the scarcity principle. When access to something is restricted, perceived value increases disproportionately to the actual restriction. But LVMH takes it further than simple scarcity. When a customer invests repeated visits, smaller entry-level purchases, a $400 wallet, a $250 scarf, and months of anticipation waiting for a flagship piece, their brain retroactively increases the value of that piece to justify the investment already made. Psychologists call this commitment and consistency bias. LVMH calls it customer development. The result is a buyer who is more emotionally invested in owning the product than when they first walked in the door. Now here is where the model becomes genuinely impressive from a pure business architecture standpoint. LVMH controls the entire value chain from raw material to retail moment. They own tanneries in France and Italy. They own watchmaking workshops that supply expertise across multiple brands. When Louis Vuitton claims made in France by master craftspeople, that is a verifiable, legally defensible statement, because LVMH owns the workshops. Vertical integration serves two functions simultaneously. It maintains quality control at every stage, and it provides a brand narrative that no competitor operating through contract manufacturing can credibly replicate in 5 years or even 15. The distribution strategy is equally uncompromising. LVMH operates mono-brand boutiques in the most expensive retail real estate on earth. Louis Vuitton is not on Amazon. It is not in mid-tier department stores. Site selection follows logic closer to institutional real estate investment than retail strategy. Champs-Élysées, Fifth Avenue, Bond Street, Ginza. The store itself is not a point of sale. It is a physical argument that the brand's claims about itself are true, rare, elevated, and worth traveling to. Before we get to the deepest layer of this model, the one that most MBA case studies miss entirely, consider what has been built so far. No discounting, ever. Heritage purchased at distressed prices and amplified over decades. Full control of distribution. Scarcity engineered as a demand driver rather than a supply problem. This is the foundation. The ceiling is what comes next. When someone buys a $2,000 Louis Vuitton bag, They are not purchasing leather and brass hardware. They are purchasing a story they will tell about themselves. And the moment they tell that story at work, at dinner, in a photo, they become an unpaid sales force. Research by the NPD Group found that 44% of luxury purchases in the United States are influenced by seeing the product on someone the buyer already knows. Not digital advertising, not influencer campaigns, direct peer transmission. This creates a compounding dynamic that is structurally unlike almost every other business model. The more Louis Vuitton bags appear in aspirational social contexts, the more desire is generated in the next tier of buyers. But because production is deliberately constrained, scarcity is maintained even as desire grows. Demand scales faster than supply by design. This is the inverse of how most businesses operate. Most companies build supply to meet demand. LVMH manages demand to outrun supply. The result? Gross margins that consistently exceed 65% and a portfolio of brands that barely registered the 2008 financial crisis. During the worst consumer recession in a generation, Louis Vuitton revenue declined by approximately 1%. The reason is structural. LVMH's core customers, the top income tier globally, are insulated from downturns. But more importantly, for the aspirational buyer one rung below that tier, purchasing an LVMH product during a difficult economic period is not irrational. It is a statement of resilience, taste, and personal achievement. Economic uncertainty does not reduce the desire for that signal. For many buyers, it intensifies it. The complete LVMH playbook: manufacture and defend scarcity, acquire and amplify heritage no competitor can recreate, control distribution absolutely, price for dream value rather than cost plus, and design a product experience that converts buyers into brand ambassadors who sell for you at zero marginal cost. Every element reinforces every other. Remove any single variable, allow discounting, expand distribution carelessly, lose design relevance, let the heritage narrative erode, and the entire architecture weakens. The lesson is not simply charge more. Businesses that raise prices without building the underlying architecture lose customers immediately. The real lesson is this: in any market, there is a tier of buyers who are not purchasing a product. They are purchasing a story about who they are. Finding those buyers, understanding precisely what story they need told, and constructing an experience that makes access feel meaningful and slightly difficult to earn. That is the most durable, highest margin business problem you can solve. Bernard Arnault understood this in 1987. 36 years later, LVMH is worth over 300 billion euros. Subscribe to Business Decoded for more real business strategies every week.